Hey everybody, welcome back to a slightly different video. Now, 2 days after the 4-month anniversary, if that's what you want to call it, of WARNO's early access release, I decided to make a small video, just going over how the game has fared, what happened since then, and how it's been developed, how it's been going. But things first. I'm not going to tell you if you should buy the game or not. Every now and then people keep asking, not just me, but anyone else really, should I buy the game, should I not buy it? And at the end of the day, nobody can or should really tell you to do so. Because it depends on like two things. Two single sims with any game. Do you have the money and do you have the time? Like, if you don't have the money to spend on it, on something where you're like, I'm not sure if I enjoy it or not, and same with the time, I don't know, I have very little time available to me. I'm unsure, then honestly don't buy it. It's an early access game, which typically have their player peak at release, like full release day. So, it's not like in 5 months the game's gonna be dead. At least if you look at other early access games. And the game's gonna be more polished, has more content, and also any single player content, which currently it doesn't really have besides single player skirmish. So if you're on the fence, you're not sure and you don't have both time and money just freely available to you, I would suggest waiting. Simple as that. Now let's actually take a look at how Wargame has fared. So you can't see it here on the side, it says 18th December, essentially 1 month before WARNO even got released in early access. It got announced, so it was a fairly shorthand announcement and release, which I think was a good idea. Some people keep saying that, they rushed it out because of Broken Arrow. I've said it before, I'm still saying it, I don't think that's the case at all. You don't just suddenly make a trailer and release it a month later within like 2 weeks after seeing that Broken Arrow, has shown gameplay or whatnot. I don't think that's the case at all, but yeah. Yeah, it released on the 20th of January. The plan was, or is, for it to be in early access for 6 to 8 months. I'm gonna talk briefly about this later, but I hope they consider extending this period of time. Alien battle setting, so to speak, i.e. 1989 Cold War gone hot. We have divisions from Steel Division instead of nations or coalitions like in Wargame. And in their words, there it is. We took the most of the exciting fun gameplay of Wargame and added all the best elements of our Steel Division series to the mix. And voila, WARNO was born. And to an extent we got it, right? Compared to Wargame, we have stuff like the line of sight tool and smart orders, for example, which, both are present in Steel Division. The game launched with 2 divisions, which honestly isn't a lot, right? We had, let me go into the armory. All we had were the 3rd Armored and the 79th Soviet Armored, I guess, division. And not just that, what we currently have is also not what we had back then, right? There were no, and there still are no towed units, of course, but we didn't have weapon teams like the Conquerors. Some individual units, like for example the 3MG squads, were not gone. Some planes were not in there yet. Like the MiG-27 we didn't have, although we did have a MiG-25 seat placeholder. I think MiG-23s came with a small update later. I believe the Raven wasn't in there yet. F-16s we didn't even have at the start yet. We only had F-4s, the F-15 and F-111s, I believe, and the A-10s, right? So some things just simply weren't in the game yet. I'm not sure if the Black Hawk was at release. There you go. I believe 3rd Armored was mostly complete. I think Mortar wasn't in the game just yet. Some few individual squads weren't in there. I think one of the engineers or something wasn't in there just yet. Of course, no tow teams. Stuff like that. So, frankly, very little content. I think map-wise we had Death Row, we had 2 ways, Chemical, and Danger Hills. So 4 maps. I don't know, some people keep saying, oh, we need more maps, and I agree we need more maps, but I was a lot more bummed out about having only 2 divisions. I don't know where I got that information from, if my brain made it up, but for some reason I was always under the assumption that it started with 4 divisions, or launched with 4 divisions. I couldn't find anything written that said that, so Somehow my brain made it up. I don't know why. And I think it would have been better if they launched with 4 divisions, because quite frankly, it was quite... No, I wouldn't say boring, but it wasn't really fun if you had the same divisions against each other. And of course, and that's, just a straight up objective kind of observation, you simply don't have the amount of choices that you have with 2 nations in a wargame. And of course, having 2 full nations is of course a lot more units and takes more work to actually implement that, but yeah. And I think the biggest thing, at least in the early days, probably was this announcement here. Pseudo announcement, really. Where, yeah, map editor. There's presumably a map editor coming. I believe they also announced it for Steel Division 2. And they never got one. I don't know if they straight up announced it or if they said they're looking into something. This is just what I remember hearing and whatnot, so take this with a big, big grain of salt. So I'm not 100% certain how all that went down. We'll have to see. I wouldn't say skeptical, but curious to how it'll gonna turn out, because as far as I know in other games, I don't know, Command of Heroes or Command and Conquer, you can download community maps like through a lobby, or you can do in like a recent game called Songs of Conquest, right? But the issue is wargame maps are huge in terms of file size, right? They're in the gigabyte area in terms of size. So obviously that doesn't mean, you can't share. There's plenty of mods that are multiple gigabytes large, but it means that sharing it via, like, you can't just hop into a lobby, see, oh, it's a modded map or a community created map, and then just simply download it within like 10 seconds and then launch the game. No, I don't know how it's gonna work. At the end of the day, any map editor is still better than no map editor, and I guess what you could do is, if they truly are large, you could just every now and then just look at some of the maps and implement them and make them official. So we'll just have to wait and see. Now, that is launch area of time. Roughly when it launched, what happened around the time. Community, I think in general was pretty optimistic. Everyone was like, oh yeah, Wargame 4, essentially, at least some of the community. In general, I think most people were just fairly optimistic, cautiously optimistic, maybe not so cautiously, just very optimistic. I think most people were looking forward, me included. Now what has happened since then? Well, the first big patch really introduced 2 new divisions and the first roadmap. This is what the first roadmap looked like. Not really much of a roadmap, huh? It's like, more like a, hey, this is the next station, not like this is gonna be our journey. So yeah, not really much of a roadmap, but 2 new divisions. Played a good bit differently. At least I would say the 8th infantry played a good bit differently. 39th, not so much. It played differently in the sense that at launch the BMP3s were kind of broken, and eventually they got nerfed into being garbage, and now they're, I guess, alright. I think they're pretty decent now. But other than that, it had very much a very, very similar playstyle to, or felt very similar to the 79th. Tanks, besides the T-80U, are essentially the same. Now they have some more T-62s, of course, and some other things have changed. Although I still would say they feel very similar. Although the 39th, in my eyes, is a lot more viable in 1 versus 1s. In total, we got now 6 new divisions since launch, right? 3 on each side, of course. 2 Americans and 2 West Germans versus 2 Soviets and 2 East Germans. The German ones also feel very similar on both sides. 2nd Panzergrenz essentially being a better 5th Panzer. And the 4th Mordschützen Division, not quite the same relation as these 2 have. They still are very similar, but while the 4th gets better infantry, they lose all the T-72s, right? Not like the T-72s are amazing, but at least you have something with armor and pen, right? They still, of course, get murdered by like Leopard 2s and even Leopard 1s, and of course base M1 Abrams, but at least you have something with reasonable armor and range and penetration. even if it's not particularly price efficient, or cost efficient, I should say. We got also a reasonable amount of new maps, right? No, don't do this. Do this, right? We got Variant on Death Row, which is essentially just narrowed down. We got Two Lakes, which in my eyes is my favorite map in terms of everything but the zones. The zones are horrible. But Black Forest, which I think is a bit underrated, but needs zone adjustment as well, just like Two Lakes. Mount River. I'm unsure how I feel about that, honestly. Iron Waters, of course. Loop, the first 10v10 map we got fairly soon as well, and Geisa. And we're about to get Triple Strike as well. Triple Strike looks great too. Iron Waters looks okay as well, but it seems to have performance issues. I don't know. We got obviously also a bunch of patches with sometimes questionable changes, or if that makes sense, questionable omission of changes. It took them, in my eyes, way too long to adjust infantry weapon damage, and in my eyes, they made the mistake that, yes, you know, the infantry DPS adjustments were, in my eyes, a success. It still needs more work, but it's certainly better than before. But like, there was already kind of an equilibrium between, like, you know, engineers and such and non-engineer squads, but they didn't even touch like flashes or satchel charges, you know, or flamethrowers or something like that. They only just small arms, so they got a big indirect buff, which I don't think really should have happened, but yeah. And now it's obviously not nearly as bad as infantry gameplay was as before, but it still is particularly great in my eyes. We got some ruin adjustments. We got removal of spawn CVs, and thus, you know, you don't need to start with the CV anymore, right, as well. So several, I wouldn't really call them like proper reworks, because at the end of the day, they were under the hood fairly small changes, which I'm not trying to say, oh, you know, removing the whole CV mechanic was easy. I don't know, I wouldn't know. But it doesn't like drastically overhaul the gameplay or anything like that. We also got an actual roadmap after Davu released. And I think, as you all know by now, if you paid any attention to WARNO, that isn't quite as accurate anymore, huh? It's released on the 4th of March, and like 13 days later, almost 2 weeks, Davu released. Murat, we just recently got early May. It was supposed to be out in March. And Lan, which is our next milestone, is gonna come maybe not even May at all, just very early June. And these two were supposed to be out already. Of course, hindsight is 2020. It's the first early access game, the first kind of roadmap. Shit happens, and I'm not like trying to shit on Eugen in that regard. At the end of the day, if you can't get it out, then you can't get it out, right? I don't think there's any maliciousness behind it, just other reasons. They say they had massive issues with the towed weapon systems. And then at the end of the day, they brought, you know, weapon teams and like weapon missile teams instead of the towed weapon systems with Murad, of course. Still, we're very, very late with these two divisions. And we also don't really know how far they are besides these systems, right? Yeah. Besides that, and of course I screwed it up. Here's the here's the roadmap, by the way. Not really much to see, but as always, I screwed up the sources on OBS. But besides that, there is still plenty of issues. Like the UI. Look, if you like the UI, good on you. Many people have expressed issues. Many people are saying this, by the way. It's just a meme. Many people have expressed issues, me included. And frankly, since release, there's basically been done virtually nothing other than giving like the option to turn off unit symbols and slightly adjusting stuff like having the air wing on the bottom left instead of top right and various smaller things like that. But no, just to let me adjust this really quick. Name or like show one thing one suggestion that has been brought up, which I think is a good suggestion, right? Where they essentially, because Wargame had, in my eyes, good unit labels. I'm not saying they were perfect, but they worked well. And I feel like in general, if you're trying to emulate Wargames success, or not success, but a gameplay and feel and such, and implement Steel Division improvements, why not take, at least in some areas, take some things that simply work in Red Dragon, copy them, and then improve them instead of trying to reinvent stuff, because they just look like Wargame symbol, but worse. What is with that, like here, what is with these huge diamonds around the units, right? Even when you zoom in, like the picture speaks for itself, right? Just pause the video if you want to read it, right? I can even zoom in a bit if it's hard to read. It's a very good picture. There's been plenty of pictures and graphics and whatnot being made to express some of the issues. This is just one of them. And I'm not, like, if you like this, that's fine. I'm not saying they should remove that. I should just say, at least give us more options, right? They can't just keep the current labels in and just do something like this as an addition, right? Yeah. Other issues are, I'm just gonna list some of the issues. There's plenty more, and not everyone has all of these issues. Some like this, some don't like that, Just some of the issues that various people have voiced, including me, like unit cards are hard to distinguish, right? If just I could like go on like, oh, launch Wargame and show that yada yada yada, but like at first glance, how are you gonna differentiate the Ito squad from an Ito squad from an assault rifle squad, or I think even worse is like Conquer squad from Motostrelki. Like, this is so, at first glance, this is very hard to distinguish, because the human eye recognizes or distinguishes color a lot more quickly than shapes, right? And here we don't really have shapes, it's more like details, right? It's not like there's like a big circle instead of a big rectangle or something. It's like details in the background, right? The guy, there's two normal looking guys in the same uniform with a helmet on. At first glance, it's incredibly hard to distinguish, hey, which is an ATGM squad, which is a Motostrelki squad. And while it isn't like a game-breaking issue by any means, it still is kind of annoying if you're in the middle of a game and you want to buy a Conquer squad, and then it takes you like 2 or 3 seconds to look like, okay, which one is the Conquers, which one is Motostrelki again? At the grand scheme of things, it probably has very rarely caused one to lose a game when they were winning it because of like 2 or 3 seconds like that, but it's still just annoying, honestly. Right, and there's also been like plenty of pictures and graphics being made to showcase this, and I really hope they're doing something, because the colored backgrounds in Wargame, they just worked. I don't know if they need to do whether they do colored backgrounds as well, I don't know, but just somehow make it so it's easier to distinguish at first glance. And frankly, and I know it's probably gonna take a lot more time and resources to do that, but the stylized unit cards in Red Dragon were just chef's kiss. They look beautiful. Now, that's one thing. Then we have like many map zones are just still the same, right? I've ranted about this a whole lot. But that's just one map, right? And I'm obviously not the only person, but Two Lakes, as good as map is, just has a horrible zone layout. Let's be real. Voice crack, a real voice reveal. Like, 2 zones to fight over, practically. And both are just simply town zones. It's just... And a blue side gets an early entry into this town, and red side gets an early entry into Jolly. Like, I just don't understand. I mean, it's not that I don't understand, it's more like, it's frustrating to also see stuff like this also not having been addressed yet. And once again, I'm not like saying they're not necessarily aware. We just don't know why certain things haven't been done yet. There's probably a reason, but we just don't know the reason. That's what I'm saying. And that's just some of the more obvious issues. There's plenty of bugs still present as well. Some of them even since launch. Like, there's this one thing that has been in the game since, like, I and some others got like access a week or so before release, right? If you look at the rate of fire formula, this says plus 33% chance to hit on elite. This is plus 15%. Sorry, not chance hit. Rate of fire plus 33% chance, and plus 25% here. Now this does not actually work like that. What it actually does is it reduces the reload time by that percent. Wait, actually, sorry, I was wrong. It still doesn't seem to be calculated properly, right? It says plus 25% rate of fire and it's plus 1, and then you have plus 33% and it's plus 4. And I don't think that's a rounding error. It used to be that it would reduce reload time by that percentage. It still seems to take either wrong numbers or still a false formula into account. Because if you remember at launch, it had a 50% rate of fire bonus, but it turned rate of fire from 10 to 20 because it reduced the reload time by half, essentially doubling the rate of fire instead of 1.5ing it. It still seems to take some wrong things into account. It jumps from 11 to 14. There's probably a decimal behind it. It doesn't show decimals in rate of fire. But even if it was a rounding error, I don't think 12.5 would be rounded to 11 and 13.3 rounded to 14. So there still seems to be some issue here. And it's been wrong since launch in one way or another. And that's besides the numbers changing. Another issue that's been, I don't think since launch, but ever since they implemented Wargame's range scaling of 1 AP per 175 meters, you still get your first AP after the first 20 meter for a tank gun. Like, so your first kinetic scaling AP, right? So between 2295 and 2276, you have 21 AP. From 2275 onwards, after 20 meters, you have 22 AP with this gun, or 20 with this gun, yada yada yada. You get the gist, right? So that's been in for a good while as well. It's quite a benefit to stuff like leveled ones, like class cannons, because it then helps them a lot more to now suddenly double tap tanks when they otherwise would need three shots. When at close range they would get one shot anyway, so that one extra AP for an M1 against Leopard 1 doesn't really matter, for example. Yeah, things like that been in the case. They're not really game breaking because at the end of the day, even if it does benefit certain tanks more than others, it's in the game for everyone, and you can live with it. It's still a bit annoying, but you can live with stuff like that. And that's just to name a few things, right? There's plenty of bugs and issues, some of course bigger than others. But yeah, you kind of expect it in early access, and that's not really something that I worry about too much. But I just want to make clear that I don't want to like bash at Eugen. I'm like, Eugen, look at this. That's been in the game since set. And while I am kind of doing that and be like, hey, that's been in there since launch, I'm not trying to like be like, Eugen is so lazy, Eugen doesn't care, because I mean maybe they are, right? I don't think so. We simply don't know, right? One thing I think is I don't think they're doing it out of maliciousness, because they wouldn't really have a reason to. At the end of the day, they're a business. They're trying to, of course, sell the game. So it would be really stupid for them to be like, oh, screw you players, because you called me a dum-dum, I'm gonna not fix this bug, That doesn't make sense. Whatever the reason is, I don't know, it presumably might just be that, they were underestimating early access, they don't have the resources to do everything, That of course would be the best scenario, and in which case it's neither laziness nor maliciousness. That's probably the reason. They're also still working on Steel Division, of course. So it's not like the whole team is constantly working on WARNO exclusively. They're still doing a DLCs and whatnot for Steel Division. So there's that as well. And we saw it with milestones, right? They of course want to bring out the milestones at a higher speed than which they did themselves, and didn't end up being able to. So it is clear that unforeseen things have happened or keep happening. That's early access. It's the first early access game, like the first true early access. They did have like betas for the previous games as well, but only for like a month or two. Yeah, it's like things happen, and that is not really what I'm hugely worried about. It's just that we don't know what the reason for that is, right? Has the UI still not been adjusted or updated or given extra options because they didn't care, or because they didn't have the resources, like the manpower or time, right? Ideally, it's the latter, but it's just for many of these things that many of the issues, bugs, or other things, we just simply don't know what the reason is. And that is honestly to me the frustrating thing. If I knew Eugen just was like, yeah, we don't really think we need to adjust the UI, I'm like, sucks, but at least I know. But posts about the UI have been made for months. Like in early March, there was even like a message from like a post from one of the Fusion guys saying, "Hey, we hear you. Yes, we agree. We're gonna implement options and such." And since then, literally nothing has happened. And again, I we don't know why. And I just given how delayed the milestones are, we can just assume it's because unforeseen things have happened, issues that they came up internally as like bugs or something that they had to deal with first, implementing the Toad units, something like that. Who knows? That is one thing. The other thing is that is important to me personally. Is Eugen willing to make big changes throughout early access, right? That is why you do early access, right? You want to have community input, you want to make or adjust certain things that you wouldn't maybe not have realized if you just developed the game and then released it at like full launch, whatever. Right? That's why you would do early access, or one of the reasons at least. But thus far, we haven't really seen any groundbreaking changes, which whether they're necessary or not is of course depends on who you ask. I would like to see some stuff like, a whole revamp of the infantry system with training being implemented again is what I would absolutely love to see, and I think would massively help the game and the diversity of deck building without like having to suddenly implement new units, right? That's one of the things I'm talking about, and we haven't seen anything on that level yet. Of course, you don't necessarily want to completely revamp a system like 2 weeks after releasing it. Some things just may need time or more content until they work out. But then again, I feel like when it comes to infantry specifically, for example, I don't really know what they would. What we already have like a very good grasp on how infantry works, but it's a different story, right? Some things you just don't want to commit too early on changing because in the long run, maybe they're actually gonna work out, right? But at the same time, you might not want to wait too long. If you wait too long, then revamping it's gonna take a lot more time because you have since then released a lot more content and has been using the stuff that you now suddenly want to rework. So it's a double-edged sword, right? So yeah, I was still hoping though that eventually they're gonna be brave enough and spend the resources, of course, because that's not. Ideally, you don't want to spend resources on reworking things over and over when you could spend those resources on doing new stuff and adding new content. Hope they're gonna do something along those lines. And then, of course, we still have not seen any proper single player content, which is to be expected, right? They were saying in the announcement or one of the posts that presumably we might see one army general campaign in early access, but the vast majority of single player content was or still is planned to be released at full launch and not throughout early access. So just in case you didn't know. And I'm genuinely excited for it. I heard a lot of good things about Steel Division 2's army general campaigns. I think they're kind of Total War-esque-ish, very roughly speaking, kind of grand-ish campaigns. Interactive, whatever, non-scripted or something. I heard a lot of good stuff about it. I'm genuinely excited because I simply didn't like Steel Division 2's, RTS gameplay, which is why I never really bothered with them. So I'm excited for that. So, what is my, I guess, verdict, if that's what we want to call it? Let me just, you know what? I'm gonna show you a video that's gonna explain how I feel right now. So for most of Warno's time out in the public, I was cautiously optimistic, and Right now, I'm more like,
I have no strong feelings one way or the other.
yeah, that's more how I kind of feel like it. I'm not really like, oh, Eugene, this sucks. Oh, Eugene, you suck. Why don't you do it like exactly how I want? You know. Obviously, I'm just one random dude, and at the end of the day, they're a business, and you know, if the majority of the player base likes the things, then it doesn't matter if I like it or not, frankly. And I would never blame them for them, right? Like I said, they're a business, so it makes a lot more sense to please the majority of people than some single dude like me, obviously. As much as I would prefer on a personal level if they did things like I want them to. Um, and yeah, and then at the end of the day, you know, the reason for why some things happen or not are irrelevant. What for us, the consumers, matter is whether things happen or not. And, you know, if you or me or anyone else likes them or not. You know, if they do it if they do things out of laziness or maliciousness or for other reasons, it shouldn't really matter. At the end of the day, it maybe does a bit. Of course, it comes across differently if they're just like, "Hey, fuck you, community, we're not gonna do it," as opposed to, hey, "We would like to do it, but there's technical limitations." You know, that obviously does come across differently, but you know, at the end of the day, if the game sucks, it doesn't matter if it's out of maliciousness or, you know, technical reasons. And I'm not saying it sucks, by the way. I'm not like being like, I hate it. If I didn't like the game, I wouldn't play it. That's what I did with Steel Division. Could have played Steel Division, could have played Steel Division 2. I didn't simply because I didn't like it. Simple as that. Yeah. As I said at the start of the video, at this rate, I hope they're gonna extend early access. Because if not, then they're planning, if they still follow the original timetable, I guess, then they plan to fully release it in about 4 months. And we have gotten, I mean, we have gotten half of the divisions now, I believe. It's supposed to be 80 divisions on either side at launch. So I guess in that aspect, they are kind of on track. But I'm still hoping that they're gonna do some, again, reworks, overhauls, whatever you want to call it. Deck building, in my eyes, needs work. Unit diversity, especially in terms of infantry, like I said, with training, for example, in my eyes, needs work. So I hope they're gonna take the time and do some reworks like that if they're not already working on it, of course. You know, UI, of course, still needs work. Um, Obviously, bugs need fixing, but that's a given. So I hope they're gonna either extend early access or suddenly manage to be a lot more productive or get past this one hurdle that they seem to, or multiple hurdles that they seem to have, and suddenly manage to roll out divisions and content and fixes a lot quicker than they have previously. Whatever the case, I am hoping for the game to improve, but I'm not as optimistic as I was before, but we shall see. In any case, let me know what you think, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Bye bye.